Hey, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't done so, why don't you hit the subscribe button for us? It really does help us out. Do you have an Xbox One, 1S, 1X that doesn't have video going up to the monitor or is intermittent video? Well, unfortunately on the Xbox, there are a couple points of failure that neither one of them are really a hobbyist level service point. One of those points is the HDMI port, and the other is the retimer chip. We had a Xbox One S come into the shop recently that the customer said the video had failed completely. So after a short inspection, we found that the HDMI port itself was damaged, and we decided to change it out before looking at the retimer chip. So if you stick around, we'll show you how to get it done. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today on the bench, we have an Xbox One S to be precise. And it came to us today because the HDMI port is messed up. The note on it, and I always like notes because it tells me exactly what's going on. The TV out HDMI port is all messed up. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Looks like it's missing some pins. So I guess that's where we'll start. Let's grab the microscope. And we'll see what we can see. And yeah, that port is messed up on that edge. Okay, so we can fix that. The Xbox One S isn't too hard to get into, but it's a little brutal, to say the least. This one doesn't look like it's ever been into. The tag's still on it, and it's not popped up. Pretty much what you got to do is just walk around the entire perimeter. The hardest part about this particular job is just getting it apart. There's quite a bit to it. So let's just go ahead and remove this warranty sticker. And this is the only bit of retaining plastic that's on it. So, to try to keep it from getting too beat up, I try to get something behind it just to lift it out of the way. Because what you got to do is just get something big and bulky in there and just start popping it. And this one is loud and just sounds like you're going to kill it, taking it apart, but it's fine. They always go back together. If you get right where the clip is and use a twisting action, you don't damage the plastic. You might get a few little bumps and bruises, but it is what it is, honestly. All right, with the bottom out, we can get to our Torx screws. There's no security screws here. And let's see. I'll be back. I'm going to grab a power tool. Okay, I know in other videos you've heard me, I don't like to use power. But in the case of a modern system, it's the best way to go. Generally, whenever I've said that, we're dealing with systems like N64s and Super NESs and, the old stuff, especially the Nintendo product. They seem like the plastic has gotten brittle, especially on the gray N64s, or the dark gray. And if you use power tools, you're just going to snap the posts right out of it. But on this one, just kind of have at it. The green ones are our chassis screws, but honestly, we're gonna wind up having to take them all out, you know, to get the board out. So okay, with everything out, you can kind of separate the back and get this out. This one isn't too bad. We'll vacuum some of this dust up before we put it back together. Since the board's going to come out, we need to get this off. And these are smaller, number 8 Torx. Dust. And this just pulls out of its connector. And then the same thing on this front panel. Actually, this is a little dustier than I thought. I'll be right back. I'm gonna do some vacuuming. Okay, I didn't think you'd want to hear the vacuum cleaner running. So anyway, our screws are out of our front panel and we can just lift it out of the socket, just like with the our Wi-Fi. Let's see. Let's go ahead and get some of our drives out. These connectors just lift straight off. They can be a little stubborn, but they just lift straight off. Also, just a little FYI, and I'm sure most of you are aware of it, with the optical drive on not the PlayStation, with the Xbox, the motherboard knows the serial number in this. So if you ever have to swap out an optical drive, you can't just swap the entire drive. You actually have to take the main board out of your optical drive and put it in the new one. All right, so let's see. We can get our power brick out. Of course, this one's going to be stubborn too. All right, we're just going to pull the plug. You'll need something flat to get down inside, and you can see the little the clip. Like that. I don't know what that was hanging up on. Normally you can just flip them out and get full access to it, but anyway, not impossible. So there's two more things we've got to do. One is this little metal clip here, which can be a real pain in the butt. And honestly, the best way to handle it is just with a big pair of pliers. Put it where you can see it. Just grab it from the top, give it a wiggle, pull it off. All right, and that leaves us with the only thing holding us in, and that's the actual screws for our cooling fan. Now we don't have to, this didn't come to me with an overheating issue, so we're not doing thermal grease. And to be very honest, I don't like taking the clamp off of a Microsoft heatsink. They scare me a little bit, to be very, very honest. And the reason is it's basically a spring clamp. I'm sure you've seen it in other videos. And it hooks underneath the pins that support the heatsink. And you know, sometimes you get to them and you put a pick inside and you rotate it and they just pop right off and it's not a big deal. But there's other times you've got to really work at it, and you know, sometimes you got to put more pressure on the board than I like. And then even putting those ones back together, you know, you got to put a lot of pressure, and you know, you put your thermal grease on the chip, you put your heatsink on, and as you're trying to get that spring on, you know, it's walking back and forth. And anyway, it's just something that concerns me a bit. So once we're here, we can tip it. There's our main board. All right, I'm gonna do a little more vacuuming and I'll be back again. Okay, we got our main board out and we've got it vacuumed pretty well. Like I said, this one didn't come to us with an overheating problem, but I still, you know, before we returned to a customer, I still wanted to vacuum out all the fins of the heatsink. You know, you can get to this one pretty easy, toothbrush and the vacuum cleaner. So anyway, this is the port that's in question. And as you can see here, how it kind of separates out. It's because, you know, it's been blown open. And in turn, that wiggles around and then it broke the plastic bit inside. And I do happen to have another one of those on hand. And yeah, that's the right one. So this is going to go the way we've done a lot of these other HDMI connectors. We're going to put heat on the back of the board, and we're going to put some leaded solder on it to help things move. And let's see, we're going to have our air temp up to about 475. And we're going to have our soldering iron up to 430. Just because it doesn't need to be that high to melt the solder, but we need the reserve to heat the parts quickly. So let's see, we're going to need some desoldering braid, we're going to need some leaded solder. We could put some low flow solder or low melt solder on if we need to, but the Xboxes seem to move a little easier than the PlayStations in that regard. So, get a little closer. Make sure we have a chisel tip on this one. I guess we should get the microscope on. Okay, so there's our port under the microscope. And, you know, I've not yet come to a proper conclusion on this. A lot of these boards, as you can see, like in here, you know, a lot of these boards look like they've gotten wet underneath. But almost every single one of these I've taken apart look that way. And at this point, I'm not sure if that's kind of how it came from the factory, you know, leftover flux or whatever, because it is a little on the gooey side. But, you know, there are points on the board that almost start to look corroded from it. Or if it's like a condensation problem, because, you know, this gets hot and there's a metal tin directly under it. You know, it's only, you know, a quarter of an inch up. And, you know, I don't know if it's something that's happening over time. I almost like to buy one brand new and take it apart just to see. But anyway, here's our port that's in question. And as I said earlier, you can see it's kind of blown open. And there's no way to save those, even if the center part wasn't broken. You know, I've tried to clamp them and put a dot of solder on them, but they just wind up splitting again. So anyway, let's go ahead and get a little flux and leaded solder on all this. Obviously adding leaded solder to the no lead solders is just going to help things flow a little better. And even though I use an excessive amount of heat, you know, some people use more heat than me. I've had other people that are, you know, I'll call them a professional, you know, actually criticize what I'm doing because of the amount of heat. But the reality is, or my philosophy is, when we're putting heat on the board here, and I know the solder melts at, let's say, 300, it would melt properly at 350-ish, 380-ish degrees Celsius. If I ramp up that heat to almost 500, you know, 470, it's going to heat this board quickly before it has time to creep and heat the rest of the components. Also, when you're dealing with something like the air gun, you know, you've got your flow, your airflow coming in, but you also get a Venturi effect where it's pulling cool air down with it on either side of that hot stream. So you actually will start to protect some of the board around it. And that depends on how close you're getting and whatnot. And matter of fact, this Venturi effect, or this drafting effect, is actually what keeps something like a turbine engine from eating itself. You know, you've got combustion chamber temperatures that are much higher than the metal of the combustion chamber could withstand. But because you're drawing cool air in and around, right at the surface, you stay below that critical point. But anyway, I digress. So let's go ahead on this side. We're going to have to refocus. Make sure we're on the right one. Yes, we are. Why does that look like it's kind of a mess? Just reflections. We're good. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get some flux and low lead, or actually low melt solder on the back of the port. See if we can focus that a little better. There we go. Okay. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and use low temp solder. Because I don't want to rip up any of the traces, and that's the biggest part. Okay. One of the next bits of equipment I want to get is a autofocusing microscope. It would make life a lot faster. Okay, we'll turn our airflow up to about 30%. Sounds like our fan's starting to wear out. And we'll get our tweezers, our hot tweezers, the ones that are burnt, beat up. And it's out. All right. That one took a little bit more time than I was hoping to get it out, but it's out. I'm going to go ahead and put some low melt solder on here. It'll help wick it out. There we go. Nice and clean. For anybody who's doing this at home, you know, it's important to get those holes cleaned out so you can get the new port down in flush and, you know, not have any problems. Also, if you are new to a hot air station, you know, go ahead and hit that as soon as you can after heating the board, you know, because that solder is going to be hot and it'll flow. All right, so let's check out the other side. It's still a little toasty. Okay, let's see. There we are. Focus this in. Actually, it came out pretty clean. Let's go ahead and clean up the burnt solder, or sorry, burnt solder paste. This is just 91% alcohol IPA. And let's get a fresh spot on our braid. We'll get that little blob off there. Actually, we'll put a little more fresh flux down. I always try to scrub when possible with the pins. You know, sometimes if you get aggressive going sideways, sometimes you'll roll one off. You know, there was a lot of pressure on that port to break it, so you know, we don't want to put any extra pressure on it. There we go. We're all clean. And we're all prepped. Is that one open? Yeah, that one's open. Okay. All right, so a couple ways of tackling this. First, let's make sure our port fits down in there nice. And it does. Still got some strange glare on there, but yeah, it is what it is. Make sure all of our pins are straight. Sometimes you take these HDMI ports out of their little packaging and you'll get some bent pins. But these ones are all straight. Okay, so our next thing is to put some leaded solder on these pins. So flux is our friend, as always. As one of the other guys that I like to watch his channel, it's Northridge Fix. He really, he really does a great job, and he salvages a lot more than I would be willing to work on. Anyway, in the last few videos, I've heard him say, the power of flux or the magic of flux, and it's the truth. When you have good flux, you can get pads all tinned up. Focus that a little better. You can get pads tinned up and no bridges. Like that. Okay, so we'll clean our tip off again. We will put our new port down in place. Actually, I'll make sure it's, yep, we're down in the whole way. Where are we at? There we are. I will put some fresh flux on those pins. Flux is cheap insurance. And I know in a couple videos before, I had looked and I'd used like 2 milliliters. I've used another milliliter and it's been at least another 3 or 4 weeks since that. You just don't use all that much, even glopping it on. And, I don't recommend doing it that way because you wind up just wasting it because you'll wind up cleaning it off later. But you want to use enough to do the job. So we're just going to put a touch on that tip. I'm going to hold that port in place, and we're going to just kind of like that. Yeah, we'll touch this last one again. There we go. And we will flip this over. Let's move our braid and this old port. Flip this over. We will solder our chassis. Now this one on the Xbox actually sits low, so this is not, you know, an issue. Just like that. Okay. I'm gonna do a little cleanup while we're here. Okay. Now, the last bit of this job, we're going to come back over here to this port, and we are going to get some small tweezers, and we are going to come in and actually, under the microscope, you know, go in between and give them a nudge. You know, not a ton of pressure, but enough to know, you know, is that solder? Soldered. Do each one. And also, whenever you're sliding the tip of this in, you can feel if, you know, if you've got a bridge maybe. But we'll give it one last inspection. Okay, those are all soldered. Let's go ahead and clean up our flux. Now we just have to hope the retimer chip was good since we didn't get to test it beforehand. And turn off the light on that. Sometimes it helps cut the glare. But then again, I can't see anything. There we go. And yeah, there's no bridges. Everything looks nice. We know they're all soldered. We gave it a shove. Okay. All right, we can get this out of the way for now. Okay, so the job is done. And that's pretty much it. All that's left to do is reassemble it and send it back to the customer. Let's do that. Okay, we're back. Put it all back together. You know, I figured you saw me taking it apart. You don't need to see me putting it all back together. So let's go get ahead and get an HDMI cord. Make sure we put it in the right one. You know, since Xbox has an in and an out, I think they finally killed it on the new one, but you know, I've done this a few times and had customers say it doesn't work. And the reality is they had it in the wrong port. So, okay, we got power, we got HDMI, we got our signal moved over. Come on. There we go. Got a little worried for a second. Anyway, so yeah, we had a successful port change. The Xboxes, I think I mentioned earlier, that retimer chip, it is a tad fragile. And there's, I'd say, 20% of the time, 30% of the time, you know, I get somebody saying the HDMI port is messed up. And I'm changing a retimer chip also. So, you know, it happens. Just be aware of that. If you have an Xbox, you're paying somebody to do it and they quote you a price, but then they come back and add another whatever, $50 or $60. You know, please be aware of that. Anyway, if you found this video informative or entertaining, give us a thumbs up and consider hitting that subscribe button. Also, make some comments below. I answer pretty much any real question I see. Thanks for joining me today. We'll catch you on the next video. Thanks.